get to the discussion that is who on earth comes in next. But Rob, let me start with you and just find out exactly the last 24 hours how Man United decided to get to this decision. Why now? Because it did feel like the writing was on the wall for some time.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are lots of Man United fans who think that this has been a long time coming, that probably should have been done a long time before this. You only have to look at the league table to understand why United have been driven to sack Erik Ten Hag. I mean, they're 14th in the league. It's not like they've played a couple of games. You know, you near enough played sort of 25% of the league season, and they're 14th in the league, and that just shows you that things haven't been good enough. United privately are saying that this isn't just a reaction to this start of the season in isolation. It's also a reaction to what happened in the Premier League towards the end of last season. Obviously, last season they finished 8th. They started last season particularly poorly as well. They're also saying privately that the way things are going, that they already think that they're well adrift of the top 4 places. At the moment, they're averaging about 1.2 points every Premier League game. Last season, they got 60 points at an average of 1.58. They finished 8th. So they're already concerned that United are far too far adrift to finish in the top 4 and qualify for the Champions League. And that's why they've been driven to make this decision right now. Obviously, you know, lots of Man United fans will say, well, why wasn't this done in the summer? Well, in the summer, he'd just come off the back of winning the FA Cup against Man City, you know, gave everyone a lift, the fan base and the players. And what they hoped would be a kickstart to the new season under a new ownership, a new structure, new players. Simply just hasn't happened. And they think that they've given Erik Ten Hag long enough to start the season to show ultimately that he's not the right man, and they've been forced to make this change. They're saying that they just couldn't let this go on any longer because they were worried that things just wouldn't turn around, that they'd given Erik Ten Hag more than enough time to show that he was the man to turn things around. He hasn't done it, and they've been forced to sack him.
Augie, what do you think on the timing as well? Because as Rob pointed out, I think decisions are a little bit split. Some people probably thinking this was a little too late, because we did see, and we still consistently had questions about Man United, lack of identity, where they were going. We talked about it a lot. In preseason, I asked Erik himself what exactly the identity is for this United, because 2 years in, doesn't it bother you that people are still asking that? But where do you think this was a little too late?
Well, it kind of suggests that the people in charge don't know what they're doing, because this is the 3rd opportunity this season, or certainly in the last 6 months, to move the manager on after the FA Cup final, which they won, obviously, but United finished 8th last season, were nowhere near where they should have been. And then we had the situation after the Aston Villa game before the international break, where it seemed that, you know, the run of form that United run, that Ten Hag would go. It was a natural time to do it. It was a 2-week break, get a new manager in. But they decided to give him extra time after the international break, and it's not worked out. And I think, you know, when you look at the way Man United have been playing, not just this season, but last season as well. I mean, I was thinking earlier on how many times in the last 12 months they've lost games in stoppage time. Obviously, West Ham at the weekend was one, but I can think back to Chelsea last season, Arsenal last season. It's a kind of a thread that's run through Erik Ten Hag's, you know, time at United. So they've had so many opportunities to do this, and now they've done it. They've done it at the point where some of the managers that could have done it had they acted earlier are out of the question. So Mauricio Pochettino was available 6-7 weeks ago. He's now in charge of the US. Thomas Tuchel, maybe 4 weeks ago, was available. He's now taking the England job. So the candidates that are there that could take it on are no longer there. So the dithering of the Ineos board has led United to a situation where there's an obvious option. Like, even Gareth Southgate has ruled himself out. He ruled himself out about 2-3 weeks ago, saying that he wants to stay off management for another, end of the season at least, another year. So they've made this decision so late, whereby they've made it worse for themselves. So they're supposed to be the brains trust, Ineos. They're supposed to be the football experts. One criticism that was often labelled at the Glazers, quite rightly, they didn't have football people or football experts in key positions. Well, Ineos have addressed that. They brought in Dan Ashworth as sporting director. They've brought in Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox. These guys should know how to run a football club. And they're not really given a good example that they know what they're doing, because this is too little, too late. And they've left themselves in a situation where whoever comes in now has got an uphill battle to get United to the top four. And the situation as well is, because of the financial predicament United are in, they're not going to want to approach a club that's got a manager in charge. It will cost compensation. So I think we're looking at managers that are out of work right now who will be cheaper to a point. But, a lot of these coaches will look at Man United and think, I'm not going there.
James, let me come to you now, because I was actually just looking back at the last chat on WhatsApp that I had with Oggy, and it happened to be when United were playing Spurs, and we all remember what the result was there. And I said, absolutely shambolic. They don't even have Sonny. And for many people, James, I think the writing was on the wall then, because it was such a shock that Spurs were able to run riot over United. Since then, though, there have been other low points. There were the results, like, for example, against FC 20. Then there was yesterday's result against West Ham. For you, when do you feel like you realized the writing was on the wall and that a decision had to be made?
Well, it was probably last season, wasn't it? I mean, I think we can all agree that if he doesn't win the FA Cup final, he probably goes then. I think, winning that final has put United in a very difficult position, which made them that new sort of hierarchy that I sort of outlined there, put them in a very difficult position, almost right at the start, really, which is. Just effectively the first big decisions you want to make is to sack a manager who's just won an FA Cup final against the current dominant team in Premier League football in Manchester City. And you could argue that one swallow doesn't make a summer, and that's kind of what we've ended up sort of seeing in how it's played out over the summer and then obviously into this season with the results that United have had. But really, there's not been any change in United for several months in terms of the style of play, in terms of just improving individuals. How many individuals in that squad have kicked on and really developed in the last couple of years? You look at maybe a couple of the kids who come through in Kobbie Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho, but there's not been any sort of consistent improvement from even the signings that they've made of a younger age. And obviously everyone will point to Anthony because of the price tag, because of the fact that he worked with Ten Hag before, and just how little return they've got for that huge investment. But really across the board, their signings have just not been good enough. And they've got themselves into a situation where they've allowed the manager to have too much of an input into those transfers. And when you allow that to happen, and then there is no discernible style of play, and those individual players do not improve under that manager, it becomes extremely difficult to recommend him as the right man for the job. And I do think that game at Wembley just really threw the cat amongst the pigeons. I mean, there was a story that circulated the morning of the final that he will be sacked no matter what. Now, without going into the details of that story and who ran that and the circumstances behind it, what that did show was that the sort of sentiment around the club at the time was that he's probably going if they lose heavily, which a lot of people expected them to do, given, of course, how dominant City have been and how well they've played for so many years, really. So, the fact that they won that game created a problem that they've taken 5 months to solve. And as Oggy said, the timing of this doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't work for United. It doesn't work for the squad, and it doesn't work for the next manager, because whoever they get in is not going to want to take a job at the end of October, beginning of November. It's a terrible time to try and take charge. They had an opportunity to do this before, as Oggy said, Thomas Tuchel. I mean, how smart do the FA look now, by the way? Because we all sort of talked about, oh, hang on, we thought Lee Carsley was getting these 6 games and they were going to look at it in November. They snapped up one of the best managers who's available in the market, who United had already spoken to in the summer. So it's not as if they'd stolen a march on United. It's just that United kind of dithered and weren't really sure where to go, what to do. The FA have snapped him up. And now they leave themselves almost thinking, well, do we write off yet another season? Do we give it rude for the rest of the season? Do we try and find some sort of short-term solution to muddle through to next summer and then start again? And United have put themselves, they've only got themselves to blame for this, because what we've seen this season is not a surprise. And really what they should have done was sack Ten Hag no matter what happened after the FA Cup final.
Yeah, Rob, let me pick your brain on that one as well, too, because as we keep saying, we felt like the writing has been on the wall, even last season, even with the FA Cup win, papering over some of the craps this summer. There was still a lot of talk of United entertaining chats with other managers, even from before, right? With Erik Ten Hag knowing this as well. But with that said now, do you feel like you've gotten an indication of which way they're going to aim to go?
Well, I mean, they've obviously got a ready-made replacement in Ruud van Nistelrooy in the interim. That's made this very quick. It could have been a lot more messy this morning after you make that decision. If you have to go outside and look for an interim, obviously that's not the case because you've got Ruud van Nistelrooy in place already. United have indicated that they are going to look for a permanent successor. Now, you do have a situation in the same way that you had with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, in that you pick an interim manager. he does particularly well, and then there's a huge clamour to appoint him as permanent manager, and that's exactly what happened with Solskjaer. And really, that is possible. It could happen with Van Nistelrooy. If he does really, really well in the games he has in charge, there will be a clamour for him to take over permanently. Because he was such a successful player at Man United, he's very popular among fans because of what he did as a player. So there is always that option. My understanding is that Thomas Frank is very, very high up on United's list. But to go back to Mark's point, he was also high up on their list in the summer. And it's a lot easier to get Thomas Frank out of Brentford in the summer than it is halfway through a season, because Brentford would be well within their rights to dig their heels in and say, well, actually, no, you're disrupting your own season by sacking your manager. Don't come to us and disrupt our season. We're going along quite nicely. Brentford aren't going to want that disruption, even if Thomas Frank has indicated that he would quite like a challenge at a bigger club, which is more than possible, even though I think he's played it down in interviews relatively recently. Why would Brentford want that disruption halfway through the season? If Thomas Frank is going to leave Brentford, it's far more likely to happen in the summer when United had the option to look for a new manager last time. So Mark is exactly right in what he says. In terms of the other names that have been mentioned, there are a lot of admirers for Gareth Southgate, but as Mark has said, he's indicated that he's not going to coach again until next summer. Max Allegri is available, has left Juventus. Graham Potter, who Ineos have spoken to about taking over at Nice in the past, also spoke to Graham Potter with regard to the United job in the summer. Is still out of work, so he would be available. So there are options out there for Man United. But to go back to the point that the guys have already made, the timing of this is really, really poor. It's a huge first decision for Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe to pick their own guy to be their first managerial appointment, and they've already backed themselves into a corner.
Alexis, let me jump in. I mean,
this in the summer when they had the option to carry on, 2 or 3 months or 2 months into the season and then do it, it is mind-boggling, really.
I mean, all those names that Rob's mentioned and they're legitimate names. Max Allegri again out of work, Graham Potter out of work. With all due respect to these managers, United aren't appointing the best in class if they go for those coaches. They're appointing people that are out of work and out of work for a reason, because they weren't successful in the last job. So scraping the barrel might be a bit strong, but that seems to be where United are, because what they should be doing, you can bet absolutely anything you've got that when Man City have to replace Pep Guardiola, they'll do it properly. They'll have a guy in place way before he goes. That may have already have happened. So Ineos have got to this situation. One reason why that Ten Hag didn't go in the summer was because they didn't want to make such a significant change while Dan Ashworth, the football director, and Omar Barada hadn't started their jobs. They didn't start until, I think it was June, July. So that may be a little bit of a kind of a cop-out to say that, because they're obviously in contact. But the situation is that now these guys are in place, they have to have a plan. Now, they have been studying managers. We know they've been looking at managers. But again, none of the coaches that they're looking at right now are in work apart from Thomas Frank, and it's going to be hard to get him out of Brentford. So this is the problem United have got. The summer, they had all the time in the world to get it done properly. They didn't want to make kind of a martyr of Erik Ten Hag. They didn't want to sack a guy who just won the FA Cup, because forever and a day, they would have been accused of sacking a manager who just won a trophy, and the fans wouldn't have forgiven them. In some ways, the fans have to take a share of the blame for this, because they wanted Ten Hag to stay. They made it clear that they wanted him to stay. Sometimes the fans don't actually see the full picture. They don't see, they only see that the guy has done well. He played the game with the fans. He said the right things about the fans. But look, the football was terrible. The signings were abysmal. Whoever comes in has got to unpick the mess that was created by Erik Ten Hag signings. Anthony, £85 million. Matthijs de Ligt, I think we've had this conversation before, myself, Rob and James, questioning whether de Ligt was worth the money. I think he's shown that he isn't. I mean, you look at this list of signings, I think Lisandro Martinez is probably the only one you could say right now has been value for money. We haven't seen Lenny Yoro yet. Joshua Zirkzee, nowhere near good enough. And even Martinez, at times I think he kind of, again, plays to the gallery with his heavy-handed tackling and his, sometimes over-robust approach just to get the fans on his side. Erik Ten Hag has left United with a lot of bad players, and he takes the blame for that. The people who let him sign those players take the blame for it. But whoever comes in has got to get the team to win with a load of players that aren't good enough for Man United.